Captain, we have them! We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek podcast. Join Ken and Sabriel each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock. I'm Chief Engineer Ken Gagney.
And I'm Commodore Mark Thompson.
Commodore Mark, how the heck are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Ken?
Well, I am excited to be here to chat with you about Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 7, Fully Dilated, and Episode 8, Upper Decks. However, I am dismayed to realize that this is our penultimate podcast episode together.
That brings me no amount of joy either. So I am right there with you.
Yeah, it also means, of course, it's not the end of Transporter Lock. Transporter Lock will be back to cover Strange New World, Starfleet Academy. But Lower Decks is going off the air this month, December of 2024.
Fingers crossed, I'll be back here for a movie.
That would be fantastic. All right, so let's dive right into it. We have Episode 7, Fully Dilated, a synopsis being, this is the Voyager episode Blink of an Eye, where there is a planet that 1 second on the planet is a second on the ship is like a week on the planet. So you're supposed to beam somebody down and then right back because they'll spend all their time down there. But if anything goes wrong, and it always does, they end up spending months or years down there. And that's exactly what happens to T'Lyn, Tendi, and Mariner.
Yes.
So where do you want to start here?
Well, let's start with those beverages with the insane skewers.
Yeah, so we got Rutherford and Boimler, who are both trying to emulate their other dimensional selves by growing beards, and they're drinking these bizarre beverages that have like it's like a shrimp cocktail, but with everything and with beach umbrellas and everything else going on.
Yeah, it's kind of just way out there, and then they just waltz into the transporter room with them. But if you noticed, Rutherford's beard is coming in quite smoothly. There is there isn't the roughness that Rutherford's beard had over the last few episodes.
Boimler's beard, yeah.
Boimler's beard, excuse me.
Yeah, Boimler has had a patchy beard, and Rutherford is it's seamless for him. He gets compliments on it. Boimler does not. I think that is just a sign of maturity, I guess. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, we could call it that, sure. But it is interesting to see that they're both making progress with the alternate universe pad.
Although, not to skip too far ahead, but you'll notice in the very next episode, Rutherford has no beard.
Oh, I did not catch that.
Yeah, in Upper Decks, he's completely clean shaven again.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It was just a one-off, I guess. Just wanted to make Boimler feel not so alone.
Probably just in solidarity then.
That's right. So I found it interesting that when Tendi, T'Lyn, and Mariner go into the transporter room, that is the moment when they are informed, oh, by the way, there's a time dilation down on the planet. Like that should have been in their briefing for this away mission. They should have known that before they got the cosmetic surgery.
Right. Absolutely. It just seems like, well, to make it interesting for the audience, we'll introduce this little catch right before they beam down.
Right. And, maybe they knew, and that was just a reminder in the transporter room. But that one, when Mariner is like, oh, it's like the planet that Voyager went to. This just reinforces to me that everybody on the Cerritos has watched every episode of Star Trek.
Yes. Well, it actually, an in-universe explanation might be that the exploits of the Enterprise D are so just outstanding that everybody has to read them during every briefing.
Enterprise D and Voyager, apparently.
And Voyager, yes.
I guess, but like how many starships out? I mean, Sabriel and I have had this discussion as well, which is that, is it an important starship because there's a TV show about it, or is there a TV show about it because it's an important starship?
I would like to think that it's the latter, that we wouldn't be following the boring starships. Yet here we are with Lower Decks.
Right, and that's how the Cerritos began doing, the second first contact or whatever, the first second contact. That's what it was.
Yes. Speaking of uh, the cosmetic surgery, it's really quite interesting how the doctor was just grumbling like she normally is and just calls it out and says, "I'm a doctor, not whatever this is."
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the template that has been used ever since McCoy and or Bones created it back in the 60s. Have you ever heard the story about when Robert Picardo auditioned for Star Trek Voyager?
Um, I don't think so.
I may have told it on this podcast before, so apologies to the listeners, but he was, you may recall in the first season of Voyager, the doctor did not have control over when he was turned on and off. He was just a program for everybody else to use at their discretion. And there was one episode that he was reading the script from for his audition. That's the side they gave him to read, where the Voyager crew leave the sick bay and they forget to turn him off. And
Yes.
so he's just left alone in sick bay and the camera's on him and he's supposed to say, "Hello, I'm still here. You forgot to turn me off." But instead, that's what the script said. But Robert Picardo took it a step further. He said, "Hello, I'm still here. You forgot to turn me off. I'm a doctor, not a nightlight." He just added that
Yeah,
because that's exactly what a Star Trek doctor would say, and he got the part.
it's a very common connection to the original series that a lot of doctors have used over the years.
Hmm. Well, there used to be this anthology series called Strange New Worlds, not the TV show, that Paramount or CBS would publish every year. It was like fan fiction that people had submitted to be included in this anthology, and they would select like 20 stories a year to officially publish. And one of them was about the development of the Doctor on Voyager. And he was apparently modeled after some of the greatest doctors in Star Trek history. Like there was an episode of DS9 where they were considering building the next generation of Doctor after Julian Bashir.
Right.
And so the original model, the one played by Robert Picardo, he drew inspiration from a lot of Star Trek doctors, including Bones. And so that's why he sometimes says that on Voyager, is because there's actually some Bones DNA basically in his coding.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much of that is canon, but it certainly makes sense to me.
Yeah, for sure. Especially just the way that he carries himself all the time in Voyager. It does seem like he's kind of just a little bit grumpy at times.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less racist than Bones was. No green-blooded hobgoblins here.
Right.
I also, speaking since you mentioned the sick bay, I like how the doctor offered to cauterize Lynn's olfactory sensors,
Yes.
and she's like, "That would be appreciated."
It is.
Huh.
It's kind of it definitely speaks to her Vulcanness.
Yes. In fact, wasn't there? I think that came up in the very first season of Enterprise, how she was saying like that was to Paul working with Archer and saying like how she was one of the first Vulcans to be stationed on a human starship and she really had trouble getting over the smell.
Yes, I do remember that distinctly from Enterprise.
Yeah. So there were a lot of references to other Star Treks in this episode of Lower Decks, which was sort of like the founding thesis for Lower Decks in the early seasons. And in this season, I feel like they've been doing less of it. And then this episode, they just threw everything in there. There was Blink of an Eye. There was The Inner Light with Picard. I think at one point Mariner said this is some Ito level bullcrap. And I think that's referring to the TNG episode where Wesley Crusher was sentenced to death because he stepped on some flowers.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't catch that, but as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh right, I remember that.
Yeah, I to be honest, I didn't look it up in Memory Alpha to confirm that that's what Ito is, but I'm like, what else could it be?
Right. No, I'm sure you're right about that one.
Yeah. And of course, there's a lot of references to Time's Arrow, the two-parter where Data lost his head in old San Francisco.
Yeah, he tends to lose his head a lot, or I should say, he and his siblings tend to lose their heads a lot.
That is true. Yeah. So they went down to that planet. Did you have any idea of what they were going to find when they were down there?
I did not have any idea what they were going to find. I know that they had referenced the purple D. Um, so, what did the purple D leave for us? So I had assumed it was going to be some part of the ship. I did not think immediately that it was going to be a shuttlecraft.
Yeah, and in hindsight, I'm wondering why did the purple D go back through the rift of their own dimension, knowing that they were leaving behind Data's head? Did they just assume that he had died?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like one of those things where non-purple Picard would certainly have done a cursory search of the planet and tried to recover anything that was left behind. But maybe it was so urgent because they had to get back and prevent all of the clone Tasha Yars from taking over the Federation.
I almost forgot about that. Yes, that is amazing. Yeah, I guess I'm also curious how and why the shuttle crashed, because there was the TNG episode where Data's death was faked by the collector who wanted to just add him to his collection.
Right.
And Geordi was like, there's no way that shuttlecraft could have crashed if Data was at the helm. He never makes mistakes. So what could have caused that shuttle to crash? And also, why were they taking a shuttle instead of beaming down like the Cerritos did? It's just so many questions.
Maybe he was trying to escape
Oh, well,
something.
and I'm sure that these are the kinds of questions that one does not ask because they dilute one's enjoyment of the episode.
Or they enhance it.
I mean, that's my take. I'm not complaining about these scientific questions or technical inaccuracies or anything. It's just I appreciate that Star Trek is a show that makes me think.
Right. There's a lot of things that were off screen that went on off screen in this episode, including getting caught in the painting. Maybe we should have seen that episode.
Oh man, you're bringing up all this stuff I forgot. Like Boimler was disappointed. Like, oh, I've always wanted to be trapped in a painting, and I'm like, that's the worst thing ever.
It's yeah. Apparently, it's just one of those things.
Yeah, but Mariner seemed to have had a great time, and she just recounted what could have been an entire episode of Star Trek in the first minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And presumably, all this stuff goes on off screen all the time, and who knows? We might not be seeing the most interesting bits.
Wait, was that this episode or the next episode that she got trapped in a painting? I think that was the next episode, wasn't it?
Oh, was that next episode? Am I confusing things?
Yeah, but don't worry about
I'm
it.
sorry. I think I am. Yeah.
No worries. It's all good. Yeah, so they find Data's head, and I was delighted that they were able to activate it and have Brent Spiner as a guest actor.
Yes, that was kind of amazing. Thanks to Talin's, I'm sorry, not Talin, not Ta'ana.
Tendi.
Tendy's, thank you. Thanks to Tendy's scientific know-how.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of City at the Edge of Forever that Kirk and Spock went back to in TOS. And like Spock built a device very similar to what Tendi built using very rudimentary early Earth technology.
Yes. Yeah, quite similar.
It's amazing the things you can build with, just the basics. A windmill, basically.
Right. Yeah, a windmill in order to make beauty products for the locals.
Yeah, and I think Tendi asked a good question: is like, how is this not interfering with the Prime Directive? But like the more on the grid you are, the more you influence a society. Like, yes, you're not giving them earth-shattering technology, and sometimes literally, but like, who knows who will fall in love with whom because they had bouncy hair. Like you're influencing the generations of procreation.
Possibly, yes. And it's all about who can afford to buy it, apparently.
Right. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. But yeah, they have a windmill-powered positronic brain, which is awesome. And it was interesting to hear Brent Spiner because he doesn't sound like he did on TNG, which is roughly the era of this show.
Right. I would imagine that would be a little bit difficult to manage, but maybe it's just like purple intonations.
That's true. And it is the intonations. He sounded a little bit less robotic than the Data from the 1990s.
Oh, that is true. Maybe maybe he had a successful implant of the emotion chip.
That's possible. Yeah. And also, it's just the actor is 30 years older, and the version of Data he most recently played just last year on Picard season 3 had all of his emotions, and at the end, he was even using contractions.
Yeah. Well,
So
that little rule comes and goes as we need it.
that is true. If you look for exceptions in TNG, you will find them.
Yes.
But they made a point in the Picard series finale that, like, Data, you just use a contraction. And he's like, no, I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh,
Humor in writing.
yeah. I also I know we've already mentioned this, but just not to skip over it. I love the idea that there is a dimension that is just like ours, except purple.
Yeah, purple. Why would you make it gray when you could have made it purple?
That's a missed opportunity. Like, why is it gray? I mean, we make computers gray, we make spaceships gray. Why aren't they yellow or pink or blue?
Well, I think we can blame Apple probably for continuing that trend since all of their products get released in some form of titanium or gray or space gray.
They certainly continued the trend. They didn't start it though, because like going back to the 40s and, big metal computers and big iron, like those were all gray. And maybe that's just the natural color of the material they're using, and they don't want to add a layer of paint on top of it.
But even if you look at big machines that we buy now, like automobiles, most of them are sold in shades of gray.
It's true. If you look at vehicles on the road, they're almost all black, white, or gray. If you look at the clothes that people wear, especially coats, they're
Oh
all
yeah,
black, white, or gray. That's one of the reasons why I have a red car. Not because I want to be flashy or because I like to drive fast, neither of which is true, but just because I like to be able to spot it in a parking lot.
yeah. I drive a car that's very close to primary blue for the same reason.
See? Yeah. And I remember one time I was at this big outdoor festival, and there was this one woman who was wearing like green leggings and a red jacket with a yellow hat. And like you couldn't miss her because she was in this sea of beige, basically, like black and white everywhere. And
Yeah,
I had to go up to her and I just said, "Thank you for daring to stand out." And she was like, "Oh, thank you." I'm like, "No, thank you."
yeah. It does stand out, but also though, speaking of standing out, it was interesting that Data's head was purple. Like, I guess if you think about it, his skin was always like an ashen gray, right? For some reason, they were able to get all of his mechanical parts going and his positronic brain going, but they couldn't get skin tone down. And so I guess in a parallel universe where purple is prime, um, it would make sense that Data has a purple hue instead of the gray hue.
Well, there was the episode Offspring where he had his daughter Lal and allowed her to choose her gender and race.
Oh yeah,
So if Data is supposed to be humanoid, but not necessarily human, what color of human would he be modeled after? Is he supposed to be pink, beige, yellow, black, brown? So maybe they just decided, you know what? Let's not choose a color of human for him to be, and let's just make him his own because he is a one of a kind.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. That's an interesting take on it.
Yeah. Because also, I mean, given that he like was physically perfect, like he was brilliant, he was strong, like you really don't want to give a character like that blonde hair and blue eyes because that's making a statement.
Yes, I could see that.
Yeah. However, as another reference this time to the Naked Now, he is fully functional.
Fully functional, yes. Well, which is kind of a couple of blue moments in this episode with let's see what the purple D left for us, and he's now fully functional.
I mean, they have a clone, they have like an army of clones of Tasha Yar, and they have Data being fully functional. He's going to be busy.
Right.
But also, like, that is not the sort of thing that goes in a mission debriefing or a mission log. Like, okay, the Cerritos knows all about every TNG adventure ever. That doesn't include what Tasha Yar said to Data in their quarters.
Right. So either it's incredibly coincidental or it did end up in a mission log somewhere.
I guess. And I mean, we even have Mariner wondering about the Purple Enterprise. Does the carpet match the hull?
Yes, I'd quite forgotten about that.
It's
That
like
was a clever one.
my jaw almost dropped. I was like, oh my gosh. One thing about one of the characters on this show, and this is something we've seen repeatedly this season, is, and I'm glad she finally acknowledged it. T'Lyn said that she is not a good communicator. And I would have to agree with that because there's the previous episode where she was like trying to build and then destroy the shuttlecraft so she could rebuild it with Rutherford, and Rutherford had no idea that she was trying to do that to make him feel better. And this episode, T'Lyn said, "Oh, I was engaging in all these pursuits in order to increase our camaraderie." And I was like, T'Lyn, I, as an impartial observer, had no idea you were doing that.
Right. It seems like she's very much a doer and then just expects everyone to be on board with her without actually giving any indication of what her intentions are. And so they could easily be misread as Tendi misread her deeds. And it has provided some friction between her and her shipmates.
Although Tendi also was not exactly blameless this episode. She really took things too far.
Absolutely did. Which also goes back to the captain when the captain said, "Oh, you're not the only person who's going for chief science officer. You've got competition with T'Lyn." So, and I don't think that you know she had intended to pit them against each other, but the captain also wasn't very clear about what she meant.
Yeah. What do you think about the compromise that they came to where they're both science officers at the end?
I think that the two of them would work very well together, and they have in previous episodes. And I think they're also very happy about that. So I think it works out well for them.
I gotta wonder how it'll work in practice, though. Like, are they both going to be manning one station on the bridge at the same time? Do they take turns? Are they on different shifts?
Oh, that is intriguing. Yes, it would be. Unless one of them gets positioned somewhere, yeah, like you said, one's positioned somewhere else on the ship and one's on the bridge, and they switch off. But yeah, I hadn't even thought of that about the stations themselves. Although in modern Trek, aren't all of those stations kind of, or not? I shouldn't say modern Trek, TNG era Trek, aren't all of those stations kind of multi-purpose? They can be positioned at different ones at different times.
That's true. They can be reconfigured. They can be run from engineering, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we are not going to have a lot of opportunities to see how it works in practice because there are only like 2 or 3 episodes left.
That is true.
Yeah.
Has to be for the movie. I'm holding out hope.
I really liked the lurking character down on the planet who was just always spying on them.
Oh yeah, that was that's it seems to show up in a lot of episodes. Snell is his name, and that character does show up in other Trek as well, where they go to these pre-warp civilizations, and there's always somebody who's trying to suss them out.
Yeah, I mean, not Snell exactly, but somebody like him, you're right, is a common trope. There's always somebody who's trying to figure them out.
And he's very persistent. And then I can almost feel sorry for him at the end when everybody just makes fun of him because it turns out, oh, well, there's no evidence that you were right.
Yeah, and everybody knows that he lurks everywhere. So this was, I mean, whether or not he was right, his means were not appropriate. Like sneaking into their house after they've been living there for 10 months, knocking one of them unconscious. I mean, I don't care what you're trying to prove. That's not the way to go about it. And I think he was treated appropriately, even if he was right.
Right. Yeah, I could see that.
That's my take.
Don't knock out strangers.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if they are aliens. One thing from this episode that I wish was real that we could have in our real world, Schnoop fruits.
Snoop fruits.
Yeah.
Is that purple? Is that big grape thing?
I think so. And I know that they're not always that big. Lynn just grew them that big, but I just want to have something that's called a Schnoop fruit.
I can see that.
No matter the size or the color. Oh, and also it was purple, just like Data's head, which was, of course, key at the end when they drew a face on it. But
Yes,
purple was like a key color in this entire episode.
it is interesting. And I don't think purple is featured quite as much in a Star Trek episode.
It's funny that this show was so similar in ways to to the Voyager episode Blink of an Eye, because that is one of my all-time favorite episodes of any Trek ever. And I have never gone back and rewatched a Voyager episode, so I only saw them when they first aired like 25 years ago.
Thing.
But just last week, I, for no reason that I can recall, pulled up a clip from Blink of an Eye on YouTube. And I want to watch that specific scene where the aliens on the planet board the Voyager ship, and they are operating at different time dilations and for the first few moments that they're on board. And so I had that episode like really fresh in my mind, less than a week old. And then along comes Lower Decks and they do their take on it.
That clip was recommended to me yesterday, and I watched it yesterday.
Seriously?
Yeah. So
why are we having the same YouTube algorithm? Are we watching the same stuff?
I'm not sure. That's kind of, well, probably. I mean, we are sitting here recording a podcast about a relatively obscure Star Trek animated series.
I guess we might have similar interests. You have a point there, Mark.
At least one similar interest.
Yes, one significant interest. Yeah, I don't have too much else to say about this episode, and we do have one more episode to cover. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about Fully Dilated?
Not no, I think we covered it pretty well. We got all of the little bits of humor in that were thrown in here and there, and at the end of it, they all seem to have come back together, even though there was some friction along the way. So yeah. I think that sets us up really well for our next episode.
One more thing I do want to mention is that Mariner, in so many episodes of Lower Decks, is a stand-in for us as the audience, because the way she treated Data's head at the end of the episode was just like we would have. We're like, oh my gosh, I think about you a lot. You are so cool.
Yes, it's kind of interesting to see her geek out like that when in season 1, her character's come so far. When in season 1, she would have been like, whatever.
Mm-hmm. No, it's kind of like in season 3 of Picard when we had the captain who was such a jerk to everybody, and then he meets Geordi LaForge, and he's just so tongue-tied. He's like, "Sorry, it's such an honor to meet such a legendary engineer. I've looked up to you my whole life." Like, wait, are you the same guy?
No. Yes, all of the fanning out over. Well, again, they must be important. They must be important missions, important ships, and important officers to be revered by everyone in universe.
Everyone, that's true. So yeah, to your point, let's go on to Upper Decks, which is the next episode. So a very clear contrast to both the name of the series and the name of the TNG episode that the series is named after.
Yes, it is clearly the mirror of the original Lower Deck series. Now we get to see what it is that all of the command crew are doing.
Yeah, the command crew get one episode.
Yes.
Which is awesome.
Although they featured in other episodes as well. I did like this. It overall, I found it rather chaotic. But I kind of liked the chaos. Like it was like having, 5 episodes of the original all in one, where instead of just featuring one of the command crew's plot lines, you get all of their plot lines all at once.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, how a lot of the episodes you and I review have an A plot and a B plot, and sometimes there's a C plot, but not too often. And I was thinking like, wow, this episode has A, B, C, D, and E plots.
Yeah, because again, they're trying to cram the entire bridge crew's experience into one episode.
Right. It kind of reminded me of, I think the TNG episode name was Disaster, where the ship is basically adrift at sea without power. And so you have Crusher and Geordi in the shuttle bay trying to vent some gas. You have Picard with some kids in a turbo lift, and they're singing Frele
Right.
Jacques. So everybody is dealing with, I think Worf is in 10 forward and he delivers Keiko's baby.
Oh yeah, this does have notes of that episode. I would agree.
Yeah, except they were trying to do even more in this episode because let's see if we can count them all. There's Billups in engineering,
Yep.
replacing all the retrofitted tubes. There's Shax, who's fighting the astral manifestation of his own rage over being occupied.
Yes.
There is the doctor who is experimenting with her own pain levels.
Right, because she's been told that her pain management needs to be improved.
There is I think her name is Barnes, and she had evolved into a psychic caveman, and now she plays the sousaphone.
Yes.
And there's Ransom and the other shifts in the cargo bay trying to corral those sea
Bagoons.
cows, space cows.
Yep. Bagoons.
Yep. Is there anything else?
And then Foreman with her incessant schedule.
Freeman, yeah.
Friedman, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, you're
I think
right.
that's the second time I've said Foreman.
Yeah, you're right. She had a very busy schedule as well. Like she went to that performance, the actor.
Yes.
She went to the sousaphone thing. She went to the birth, that alien who was giving birth.
Oh yeah.
And just
I thought you were human.
which seems like a racist thing to say.
Right. Yeah. And then he says, I get that a lot.
And then he just exploded in blood and tentacles.
Which is very reminiscent of Men in Black.
Oh, you're right. I haven't seen that in a long time.
I know, right? That was an opening scene either for the original or for the second. I think it was for the second one.
I think you're right, yeah. So of all those subplots, did you have a favorite?
So that's an interesting question. I would have to say that I enjoyed the Shuttle Bay one the most, with the Bagoons and trying to corral the Bagoons, and with Beta and Delta ships. And then
what was it you liked about that?
Just the chaos that they weren't getting along, and that it was Ransom who, like, it was very clear pretty far into that, him telling them the story and all of this chaos going on around them, and all of them getting bored and falling asleep during the story. And then him starting to say, the only way that we can fix this. And then he starts lifting containers, and he's like, is he working out? And then he like feigns his little nap so that they have a common enemy to work against. And it was just kind of interesting that he goes through all of that to encourage them to work together, which they do in the end.
Now, see, this reminds me of the TV show Home Improvement. You remember that one?
Yes.
Yeah,
I do.
Tim the Toolman Taylor, played by Tim Allen. And
he has his two kids.
Yeah, and he would go on his TV show, Tool Time, and he would make all these mistakes and screw up, and people in the audience would be like, oh, he's doing that on purpose to teach us what not to do. He's teaching by counterexample. And that was not true. He actually was a screw up. And so I wonder which interpretation of Ransom is correct. Is he actually brilliant and he feigns being this jerk in order to get people to cooperate? Or is he actually a jerk and he stumbles into solutions?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that it's left to audience interpretation at the end. The one ensign seems to have settled in her mind that that's his brilliant tactic, and he smiles and takes credit for it. But it could go either way.
Do you have an opinion on which way Ransom goes? Like, is he brilliant or is he a fool?
Well, I think I kind of, I don't know, I kind of have a crush on him. So I would probably think that he is brilliant.
Do you have a crush on him or the actor who plays him?
The character. I would say the character. Okay. Jerry O'Connell, though, there's nothing wrong with him either.
I liked him a lot on Sliders. Did you ever see Sliders?
I did see Sliders, yes. And that was He was a good character in that too. Played a very good character.
Yeah, the first 2 or 3 seasons, the seasons that it was on Fox were really good, and then the show moved to the Sci-Fi Channel, and they like replaced all the characters except for one,
Right.
and it got bizarre.
I don't think I saw anything after the second season.
Then you saw the best of Sliders.
Apparently.
Yeah, like Quantum Leap. I love these shows where it's just a character in a different setting every week with a different supporting cast. So like you have the Highway to Heaven, The Incredible Hulk, Vanishing Sun, Quantum Leap, and Sliders. But after Sliders moved to the Sci-Fi Channel, they're like, it's not enough to just have each episode be environment of the week and then they escape. We need to have serial storytelling. We need to have like an arc that goes throughout the entire season. And that just I can appreciate them wanting to do that, and for some shows like Lower Decks, it works. For Sliders, it did not.
I could see that. Yeah, it does need that. It does need the new environment each week for it to kind of make any sense at all.
Yeah, and they still kept that, but while trying to maintain an overall arc. And I was like, these things are kind of at odds with each other. Just let it be fun. Let it just like, let's just do a lot of what if episodes. Which is what the first 2 seasons were. Like, what if the Nazis won? What if stoplights were red and green instead of green and red? Or, just.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I like this season of Lower Decks is that even though there is this overarching theme of all of these portals, then we still have all of this time to have these little side adventures that have nothing to do with interdimensional portals.
Yeah, and we still don't know what's causing all the portals or why.
That is true. And I hope they don't leave that as a cliffhanger for the movie.
I don't think they will, because you keep talking about the movie, but just so our listeners know, there's no confirmation that there's going to be anything after this season.
Yes, my apologies. I'm just being wishful, and I think if I put it out in there in the universe enough, it'll happen.
Hey, I'm still hoping for a DS9 movie.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah, but the show's been off the air since '99.
Yes.
I mean, it's been literally 25 years this year. So if it hasn't happened by now, everybody's too old.
Yeah, I can see that.
By the way, a brief aside, I just realized this the other day, or somebody pointed out to me. Did you realize that there is no evidence, we have no evidence that anybody who has ever played a leading Star Trek captain is mortal? They're all still alive.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I think you just jinxed that one.
Oh, no. No.
Well, I hope that holds up for quite some time.
Yeah, but like there are actors from TOS and DS9 who have passed away. There's one actor from Voyager who has had a really hard life and does not do conventions or anything. But yeah, like Star Trek captains, they tend to be okay, both financially and physically and mentally.
Well, I am glad that they were well compensated for their time. And I hope that they can continue to be well mentally and physically.
I too hope they live long and prosper.
I'm glad that we managed to get that one in.
I think my favorite subplot in this episode was Ta'ana. Now, the doctor in sickbay. Now,
Yes.
on one hand, I don't think that her assistant would actually practice on her, like cut her open just to cause her pain. That seemed highly unrealistic to me.
I feel like she is a very convincing woman who would probably make that man's life even more miserable if he didn't follow through with what she asked.
Yes, but it also, I don't know, like when it's not something I could bring myself to do no matter who ordered me to do it. Like, because he had just reminded her a minute ago that she took an oath to do no harm. And there he goes cutting her open.
Yeah, I get that's a good point. That's a fair point.
Yeah. But I did say that this was my favorite one because I love hearing her swear, even though it gets bleeped out. I just think it's so out of character for Star Trek that it never is not novel to me. And the culmination of that experimentation is that she gets hit with a phaser, and the alien is like, "That was set to kill," and she says, "And so am I."
So am I.
Like that one line was worth everything. I don't care what I thought of anything that came before. That was awesome.
I would agree. That's a very good storyline. And I did enjoy all of her swearing. I'm still going to stick with the bay scene, just because I don't know. I've always enjoyed shuttle bay scenes, and I don't know what it is about them. Maybe it's that proximity to space, and that you've got just a force field that is holding the atmosphere in for you while all of this chaos is going on. I've always been a fan of shuttle bays.
Yeah, like the episode we just saw, Gods and Angles, culminated in the sick bay where, I'm sorry, the cargo bay where they were all shooting at each other and then the kids come in, like, we're fine. I think it's just one of the few spaces outside of a holodeck that can accommodate large creatures or large numbers of creatures.
No, I hadn't even thought of it that way, but yeah, maybe just the fact that the larger, more open scenes go on there when you're on board a ship.
Yeah,
That might be the appeal.
if you want an action scene on a starship, the cargo bay is the only place big enough to have it. You know, unless you want people like poking around corners and shooting phasers at each other in a corridor. But if you want like some actual hijinks, you got to go to the cargo bay.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
The subplot with Shax confronting like an angry version of himself. Uh, I'm not really sure I understood that, like who he was fighting or why. He doesn't seem to be upset with himself for being angry. He's certainly upset with the Cardassians, but that's not the main manifestation that they take. They take the look of him with a snake coming out of his mouth. Um, but I did find one line of his astral projection really powerful, which was, I think the astral projection of himself said, like the evil version said something like, all the Cardassian soldiers that you murdered. And he says, they weren't soldiers, they
The
were
soldiers.
occupiers.
Yeah. And I think that's probably his own personal struggle in this situation, is that being a rebel and trying to take back his home world was probably very taxing for him, especially when he did have to kill so many occupiers.
Yeah, I'm sure he and Kira, who we have seen on this show, know each other, have various degrees of PTSD because, you know, they were part of the resistance against the occupation. Some might call them terrorists. And that leaves a mark. I mean, that life is not easy.
For sure. And it must be especially difficult to deal with the PTSD when your PTSD can project itself into physical manifestations.
I mean, did we see any physical manifestation?
Or it seemed like things that he could actually physically interact with, and that he, like these astral projections, how physically taxing are they on? Well, I suppose not, because he went into a meditative
Trance.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it turns out that all of the inner demons that he was battling ended up being the clickers.
Yeah.
Or the clickettes.
Yeah.
Am I getting that word right?
I don't think so, but I don't know what the correct one is.
Okay,
I have to
gotcha.
look that up.
Yeah, clickettes. It is the clickettes.
Okay. It was funny to me, speaking, you know, let's go on that segue to the cliquettes, that complimenting them causes them so much pain because we've seen Tellarites, they are rude to each other, you know, and that's how you talk to a Tellarite, is that you are rude. And if you're not rude to them, they just get annoyed. But with the cliquettes, they actually have like a physical manifestation of pain.
Yeah, which is kind of a next level thing to evolve. And I'm wondering how that actually helped them in their evolutionary cycle.
I also wonder how they have ever won any battle ever when they are so easily defeated.
Yes. Well, maybe Captain Freeman was the first to discover how to defeat them.
I guess.
Or maybe that's why they are so irrelevant and people don't remember them.
That's a good point, actually. We were like, who are they again? Remind me? Who? What? Oh,
And that's why you listen to the morning briefings.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, those aliens were kind of weird. Like one of them showed up in disguise and then he pulls his skin off and he's like a giant insect.
Oh, that was kind of grotesque too.
That was a little bit, yeah.
It felt like there was like brain matter and muscle tissue and everything else coming off of this alien body. I almost expected it to turn out that was a Federation officer that he was occupying.
Oh,
Yeah.
see, when he started taking his skin off in the corridor, I thought it was going to be species 8472.
Oh,
But that wouldn't make sense. Even as I was seeing it happen, I was thinking, no, wait, they're not the bad guys. We established that they're just misunderstood and they're okay.
right.
But then once they pulled the camera back and we got a full look at the body, I was like, oh, that's not species 8472.
Right. No, but it was kind of interesting that is how they tied all of the storylines together, except for engineering. Engineering was still off on its own.
Oh, you're right. I don't think the aliens went into engineering at all. They showed up to attack all the other bridge crew, but
Yeah.
Billups down in engineering and his Padawan were completely left alone.
That was the one thing I was like, oh, okay. So I guess they were going after the bridge crew, but still, it felt like that was kind of a dangly over there that didn't pull into the rest of it. And at the same time, all of these things that they were doing in engineering, where they were having these crises and these alerts, and he was stuck in a coolant tube. It didn't seem to affect what was going on in the rest of the ship,
You're right. I hadn't.
which kind of surprised me.
You're right. I hadn't thought of that. And also, how can occupying force expect to take over a ship without taking over engineering? Why would they not send somebody down there?
Yeah, it just seems like an oversight, unless I missed something.
I don't think you are. I only watched each episode once, but I saw this episode just today. You and I are recording on Thursday. I watched the show Thursday morning, and then I boarded a plane to fly from Denver to Philadelphia to go to PAX Unplugged. And as soon as I checked into my Airbnb here on the East Coast, you and I started recording. So, like, watching the show is the last thing I did before I flew across the country. You know,
And yeah, well, thank you for doing so.
and you saw it just today as well.
I did. I saw. I had a full schedule at my job. Did not have a moment to pull away to watch it, and so I had to watch it when I got home.
Oh, wow. So you watched it just before you came into this podcast.
Yeah, well, at 3:30, I managed to be able to get home early on Sundays.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for making time to do that. But yeah, the point being, even though we've only seen it once, we've seen it recently. And given that neither of us remember what's happening in engineering tying into the rest of the episode, I don't think we both missed something.
Yeah, I don't think we could have either.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of surprising for us.
Yeah. One thing we didn't talk about was how the show opened, which was with the lower deckers carving jack-o'-lanterns.
Well, that's right. Or as Talin says, mutilating gourds.
That's true. I'm gonna have to use that line next Halloween. And
would you like to mutilate gourds with me next Halloween?
Let me get back to you on that. And Talin, she seemed to know more about Earth customs than the Earthlings did.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess if you're a space-going species for as long as we've been, it might be more interesting for other people to know about our Earth-bound culture than it is for us.
I think it's also similar to how when you live in a town that has a lot of tourist attractions, you don't do them until somebody comes in from out of town and wants to do them with you.
Yes, that is, being from Chicago, I can say that is true. Thankfully, I've also been a visitor to Chicago for quite a number of years before I moved. So I've done some of the things.
Right. But it's easy to ignore what's in your own backyard, whether that is, what's it called? The bean, the Skygate?
The bean. Yeah, it's Cloudgate.
Cloudgate. Yeah. So when it's in your own backyard, you ignore the bean. And when you're a human, you ignore Halloween. But
Yes.
other people pay attention to it because they're like, oh, that's different and exotic to us. And we want to know more about it.
Oh, right. For sure.
Yeah.
You do make a good point going back to the beginning of the episode. When they're in the briefing room, and we've already mentioned some of the briefing with the cliquettes, they also bring up that the new bridge rocks were installed. And you and I were on an episode of Transporter Lock talking about a discovery um, battle scene, excuse me, where all of these rocks kind of exploded out across the bridge. And it's kind of a thing in Star Trek that whenever there's debris happening on the bridge, these rocks just come out of nowhere. And you were kind of surprised, like, rocks? What do you mean rocks? And here they actually, in universe, describe what these rocks are for. And Billups gives some very long explanation about what they're necessary for. And then Shax responds, "Oh, yeah, of course, that's," or sorry, not Shax. I'm gonna miss this one. But one of the other bridge crew responds back, "Yeah, of course that's what they for, but they just hit me in the head all the time." And I was like, "Oh, wow, in-universe explanation of rocks."
I need to go back and watch that. I completely missed what they were actually talking about. I just heard technobabble, and I tuned it out.
Yeah, so the technobabble started with Billups saying that the rocks had been replaced, and then it was Ransom actually said, "Oh, those things that hit me in the head all the time," and then Billups responded back with all of the technobabble that you're talking about to explain why there are rocks in the ceiling of bridges.
Huh. Well, how
And it had
about
something to
that?
do with the reflector array and all sorts of other technobabble nonsense. But
Amazing.
it brought me such joy because we had talked about rocks previously on
I love
Transporter
it.
Lock.
Just all that flying debris that's behind the panels when they explode. They're there for a reason.
Yeah, fans have been calling them rocks for years, but now there's an in-universe explanation for why rocks are in the ceiling of bridges.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I need to go back and watch that because this is going to reframe every episode of Star Trek I've ever seen.
Yes. It's fascinating. But speaking of framing, it's kind of interesting that at the end of this episode, the lower decks crew is completely oblivious to what's been going on in the ship. Like, I don't understand all of the stuff that's going on in engineering, all of the stuff that was going on in the shuttle bay, how these these firefights that are going on in the hallway of the Cerritos, that doesn't, or sorry, corridors of the Cerritos, that doesn't like create some kind of disturbance in the rest of the ship, so that any of our main cast knows what's going on.
Well, at no point did Freeman or anybody else issue a red alert or a yellow alert. So if
Right?
you're in the lounge just mutilating gourds and carving Vidger into pumpkins, then why would you know?
Yeah, why would you know? I must be one with the creator. Um, I just love that they're quoting everything from all of the movies and shows that we love.
Well, on that, we're almost at time, but I want to ask a question, which was when the TV show Big Bang Theory first aired, I loved it because they were talking my language. They were referencing all this stuff that I understood. But the longer I watched it, I realized, wait a minute, references are not in and of themselves jokes.
Right.
Like just saying like, "Oh, I'm late to this meeting. I better run as fast as the Flash." Like that's not a joke. That's just a reference. And so is Lower Decks doing the same thing? It's just like by saying, "Oh, look, I carved Vidger into a pumpkin." Is that a joke or is it a reference?
They do both because there are times when it is, well, no, there are times when it's relevant to what's going on. And in the case of carving a pumpkin, that relevance is kind of forced because, yes, you can carve anything into a pumpkin you want. But then when they're actually like in the thick of something and they realize that, oh, by the way, this is what happened to the TNG crew, or by the way, just like Picard, I could have my time capsule moment, right? Then it's a joke, right? It does tie into what they're actually doing, and it's not just a throwaway reference.
Sure. That's kind of like in the previous episode, Fully Dilated, when Mariner said this is some Ito level bullcrap. She's kind of making fun of the TNG episode there.
Right.
So I get that that's more than just a reference. The Vidger thing I'm less convinced about. I think if it was just the carving, that would be a reference, but then Mariner doing her Vidger impression, I think that might be their attempt to elevate it to a joke. So you're right. They do both, and the more that they do jokes instead of just references, the better. Like another example. Have you ever read the novel Ready Player One?
Yes. Well, no, I haven't read the novel. I've watched the movie, which I understand is different.
Yeah, it's different in some ways. They're both equally good. When I read Ready Player One in 2011, I thought it was the best book I had read all year. And then I
Wow.
went and listened to this podcast called, I think it's 376 pages I'll never get back, or 372 pages. It's by the creators, or it's by the people who did Mystery Science Theater 3000. So Mike Nelson is one of the co-hosts. And they basically do a book club of Ready Player One, where every week they have never read the book before, they read a chapter, and then they come back and they talk about how terrible it was. And listening to that podcast, I realized, oh my God, Ready Player One was a terrible book. But there are two different metrics by which any work of fiction can be evaluated, or any work of art. There is how good it is, and there's how much you enjoy it. And those two things don't need to be correlated.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, like, yes, I did love Ready Player One. And in hindsight, I realized, yes, it is also a terrible book because it was just making a lot of references. And at that point in my literary journey, that bamboozled me enough into liking it. I was like, oh, somebody who understands the same things I do. That's enough for me to like this book. And in hindsight, like, maybe it shouldn't have been.
Wow. And you weren't the only one. I do believe it was a New York Times #1 bestseller for a while.
Right, right. I mean, the masses are asses. So there can be it's a commercial success or a critical success. Those aren't the same thing. But
Occasionally they are.
sometimes. But we're running out on time. Is there anything else you want to talk about with Upper Decks?
I think we've thoroughly reviewed Upper Decks. I enjoyed it. I would have to say, of the 2 episodes that we reviewed this week, I preferred the first, or episode 7. This one was episode 8 was just a little bit too chaotic for me.
I also preferred Fully Dilated. I feel like they pulled in a lot of not just references, but inspiration from across Star Trek lore, like Blink of an Eye and The Inner Light. And we're like, let's do our version of this. And it was nice to see them mix it up. Whereas this episode this week, also a lot of fun, but just, I think they tried to do too much. And I can understand why. But the TNG episode Lower Decks introduced characters we had never seen before. And the Cerritos episode Upper Decks, these are all characters we already know who just don't get a lot of time.
Right. And I wouldn't, and I would have thought they would have had an opportunity to expand those characters a little bit, but I don't think we really saw anything new this week from those characters.
Maybe a little bit, like how much Shax was disturbed by the occupation. But I think we kind of could have inferred that from his conversation with Kira.
Yes.
But yeah, a lot of it was stuff we had seen before, just in a different context.
Right.
Yeah, but
I still enjoyed it. Still enjoyable.
Oh, absolutely. Me too. I enjoyed both of these episodes, and I hope to enjoy the next 2 episodes because they're our last episodes of Lower Decks. So that means that you, Mark, and I will be back in 2 weeks with one more episode of Transporter Lock to cap off our run of Lower Decks. Until then,
strong and brave, wise and true. That's what makes us Cerritos crew.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.